Few people would deny that Europe exists, but there's a whole range of perceptions as to what Europe entails and what it comprises. Geographically, we generally limit ourselves to the landmass between Atlantic, Mediterranean and Ural, but that is not the only definition. Geographic notions have to some degree been replaced by political ones. The European Union does not include the whole continent of Europe defined geographically, nor does it limit itself to it, as witnessed by many overseas territories that range far beyond the shores of the Atlantic. Belonging to Europe, therefore, is not only about the geographic notion, it is also about the norms and values that societies adhere to. Signing the acquis communautaire, for instance, brings in a whole set of laws that are to be applied uniformly in every member state of the European Union. Few people would also deny the existence of Africa. There's a somewhat clear idea of the geographic borders of Africa, and there's an idea that this is somewhat distinguishable from the rest, both from inside Africa, but also as perceived from outside. There's a remarkable congruence between the geographic notion of Africa and the political one as embodied by the African Union and its member states, which comprise all but one of the countries located on the African continent. Underpinning this congruence is not so much an acquis communautaire type of legal agreement, but rather a political ideology, namely Pan-Africanism. Its anti-imperial and also anti-colonial stake has served as a basis to justify unification of the continent after colonialism. Though the African Union aspires to unify the whole continent, the political reality of regional organizations is much more complex. We have a whole range of organizations that define different terms of what is southern, central, east and other parts of Africa, which all have different mandates, which partly overlap and which make dialogue with African regionalism more complex. The European Union maintains relations with most of the regional organizations on the African continent, usually via the regional secretariat or headquarters. The EU provides a bulk of the funding for the budget of these regional organizations. The relationship between the European Union and its African counterparts is quite unique in terms of its density and regularity. There's a whole set of institutionalized exchange mechanism between parliamentarians, between heads of state and other executives, which meet regularly at summits. This density of exchanges, as well as a financial dependency between African regional organizations and the European Union, has facilitated transfers of ideas and also knowledge sharing, which has brought about certain similarities with respect to symbols and institutions. The similarities between the European Union and the African Union are quite striking, not only with respect to their names, but also with respect to both having a commission, to both accrediting foreign diplomats and having their own bureaucracy building up. But does that really mean that they're both moving into the same direction or the same model of regional integration? Whereas the European Union manages to speak with one voice in important fields of international relations, such as trade agreements, the picture is very complex on the African side, with all kinds of actors claiming to speak on behalf of a region and having a mandate to interact with the European Union. The complicating relations with African regionalism is the political economy of each region and the unwritten rules of the game. There's a wide range of presidents that have been in power since before the day I was born, and having such long-standing presidents means that they are usually not very keen to have someone else speaking on their behalf. Since political power is strongly associated with the nation-state, there is a huge reluctance to give up any national sovereignty, even though in many cases that's national sovereignty, such as in the case of the Central African Republic, doesn't go much further than the actual borders of the capital city. Nationalist policies have therefore undermined the Pan-African ideal of forming one unified continent. At the European I find it much easier to travel throughout Africa than, for instance, a Cameroonian would, who needs to apply for several more visas than I would. However, in other areas, there has been considerable progress, for instance, in peace and security. The prevalence of cross-border conflicts, of armed rebel groups and of terrorist organizations has fomented the idea that there needs to be a regional response to these, and accordingly joint intervention forces, conflict prevention mechanisms, and so forth. West and Central Africa are also home of a monetary union that is far older than the euro in Europe. This monetary union also testifies to the relationship between the EU and Europe. The CFA franc is pegged to the euro, and it is still guaranteed by the former colonial power France. The ideal of Pan-African unity has successfully made its way into popular culture, be it by musicians, by writers, or other artists. I have yet to see someone with the African Union tattooed on their body. However, in Africa, it is not unseen to see people expressing their passion for the continent in such a way. Focusing on formal regionalizations conceived by political elites distracts from what is actually happening on the ground, from how regions are perceived by the citizens. Borders in Africa are home to numerous, often informal interactions every day, be it by trade or also migration. Can we thus conclude that Africa is following the European model of integration? Some fundamental differences remain. In Europe, the pattern is more black and white, with clear rules and delineations. In Africa, the picture is more blurry and interwoven. Nevertheless, regionalism remains a central element of both their self-perceptions, and both continue to walk in the same direction.